Okay, great to be here. I'm representing Open and Agile Smart Cities, but I did work for the Catapult some years back, and I've been a member of the Digital Twin Hub for quite a while, although I'm not being as active as I should be. Developing tools to accelerate the implementation of local digital twins. So I want to start by quickly talking about three key concepts: local digital twins and Cityverse, data spaces, and MIMS. So it is interesting. Some of these things haven't come up, I guess, and so I'll probably need to read this, because let me just turn this around a bit. So local digital twins, how the European Commission talks about city twins of places. And local doesn't mean close, it means locality. So a local digital twin is a digital twin that replicates what is happening within a locality, whether it's small, as a neighborhood, whether it's a city or whether it's a region, and tries to identify all the different things, all the different services and infrastructures that are in that locality, so that they can be better managed as a whole. And it doesn't mean a single digital twin. It means how digital twin technology can be used by the different domains, systems, and issues in that locality to help manage it properly. So the Cityverse is something that the European Commission is very interested in, but really all that's about is stepping into a local digital twin, whereas the kind of picture we have is a local digital twin. You have big screens and people looking at stuff and moving stuff around. It's where you can use the technology of a local digital twin combined with augmented mixed reality to step into that and to be able to look at actually what it would look like on the ground, and to get people together in a place looking at, if we change this, what would it look like? What would the difference be? The other thing is that local digital twins themselves require a data sharing ecosystem. So that's why we're talking about data spaces here. If you're managing a factory with a digital twin, or if you're building a Formula One motor car or a rocket, pretty well you own all the data that's relevant yourself, and it's fairly simple. But when you're trying to replicate a locality, there are many different agencies in that locality that are delivering different sorts of services or managing different parts of the infrastructure. And what's important is you need to be able to bring that data from those many organizations, which will be in many different formats, together, so that you can start to gain the wider insights you need to build that local digital twin. And of course, we know that there are different sorts of ways that that's being done. Data warehouses, data lakes, data spaces. This has missed out some of the things. This is about, well, I just talked them through, really. Let's go back to this thing. So data warehouse is everything's nicely organized. You think about what data you want to share. You know already what you want to share, how you want to use it, and you put it into the formats that it needs to be in, and it's all nicely organized and easy to use. The trouble with the data warehouse is that you need to know beforehand what uses you're going to put that data to, and what data is useful and what isn't useful. And what we've recognized, of course, is that lots of the time we find out later, if only we had that data that we could use to help us understand things better. And so there's been this move to a data lake where what we say is, give us all your data, doesn't matter what format it's in, what it's like, what quality it is, give it to us. And then when we want to use it, at that time, we'll transform it and make it usable. So that's been quite a big move over the last few years. But the thing, of course, is that both data warehouses and data lakes are centrally managed effectively. It's where you give your data to some other agency to manage so that it can be used in different ways. What a data space is about is a decentralized way of sharing data, where you find an existing ecosystem of organizations that are managing something together. It might be a port, it might be transport in a city, it might be energy. So you have an ecosystem of players that having to manage together that whole system and recognize, therefore, even though they're in it for the money, maybe some of the other players are competitors, but they know they need to share information and data so that they can manage that whole system better. And so a data space is where you find an ecosystem like that. And what you do is you enable each of the players to continue to keep hold of their data. They don't give it to anybody else. They hold it, but they make public which data sets and data sources they're willing to share, under what conditions and with whom. And then there's a governance thing set up whereby those agencies that are authorized to use that data are able to take it and to manage it according to the rules and governance that's there. And so it's a decentralized way of managing the data that we need to set up a local digital twin. Now, data spaces are still not very well known outside of Europe, although other countries are taking it on. But actually, it's a big heavyweight initiative. Catena X, for instance, is a global data space that's used to manage, if you like, the global supply chains of the automobile industry. Many, many different companies are working together to ensure that all the supplies needed to build cars are sent to the right place at the right time in the right way to make sure that everything can be done in the most efficient way possible. And that's fully commercial, it's growing fast, and there are other commercial data spaces already being set up. And Europe is doing its best to help push this forward within Europe. And what it's doing is it's taking different aspects, different domains, different systems, such as health, such as education, such as transport. And what it does is to set up projects, fund projects of the key players together to look at what the challenges are and how to overcome those challenges to enable data sharing within that particular sector. And then what it does is, having done that, it then builds a data space that can allow all of the players in that kind of domain not only to share data among themselves, but to share data as and when needed with other data spaces in other regions and other areas, to make sure that things can be managed not just on a local basis, but on a wider basis too. And there's an example there of energy, where there's a list of 5 different big projects that were set up by the Commission, funded by the Commission, involving key energy suppliers and key players in the ecosystem that provided lots of really useful results and tools. And now I was talking at I was speaking at a workshop yesterday in CME, which is being set up now to bring all of that together and make an energy space for Europe, which could be used both locally, regionally, and across the member states. Now, of course, Open and Agile Smart Cities, we're interested in city data. And so we, as Open Agile Smart Cities, have been very much involved in managing a European data space for smart cities and communities. And that's also involved developing good practice, running pilots, learning what works and what doesn't work, and putting together good practice. So that's data spaces. Minimal interoperability mechanisms. Now, I'm the MIMS ambassador for Open and Agile Smart Cities, so this is close to my heart. What this is about is, in all the needs to develop local digital twins, to share data more generally, the key challenge, of course, is interoperability. And of course, there are many issues that get in the way of helping data, different data sets, different sources to work well together, different kinds of data, different challenges. What do you do about personal data? What do you do about security? And so, of course, standards are the answer. Standards organizations are working very hard to tackle all of these different issues and find common ways to develop processes that will enable these things to be managed well. And of course, if we all follow the standards, there wouldn't be any problems, would there? But that's not necessarily true, because standards, and I spend half my time on international smart city standards. I'm passionate about standards, but standards are not perfect. They can be very complicated. A couple of months back, I was in ETSI work on an NGS ILD standard, which is about managing data. And they have a over 400-page standard so far. And that's fair enough, because what they do is they look at all possible things that might happen and how to solve it. So they say, if that happens and then this what goes wrong and this is needed, then this is what you do. And so you have hundreds of requirements which are important to be there, but make it daunting for any organization to want to comply with those things. So they're very complicated. And then the other thing is there are different sorts of standards for different kinds of data, mobility data, geospatial data, historic data, and so on. So you have different sorts of standardized data sets that need also to be brought together. And what we're trying to do in open and agile smart cities for the minimal interoperability mechanisms is recognize that interoperability isn't an all or nothing thing. It's not that you have plug and play interoperability, you just put the things together and they work. Otherwise, it's a nightmare. You've got lots of manual work by software staff to fix it. The reality is that there are many things you can put in place that help. They don't solve it, they don't make it interoperable, but each tool that you can put in place makes it that bit easier to align these different sets of data together. So for instance, making sure that the data models you're using for each entity are aligned, the identifiers you use are aligned, and so on. And there are many of these, and that's what we're trying to look at in the minimal interoperability mechanisms. Now, the history goes back really about 10 years, and we started to work on these where it was a very much simpler world, particularly for cities, where cities were just beginning to use IoT to develop smart initiatives. And what was needed was to find common, easy ways for cities to collect that data and to use that data that allowed the data that was being used for one project like smart parking or air quality to be easily ported to other cities that were following that same sort of process, or even within the city to other initiatives that were also handling data in that similar kind of way. So we focused on coming up with a number of minimal interoperability mechanisms that help cities in this very basic, simple way of handling data. And they've been widely used and well appreciated throughout Europe and in other countries in the world as well. But what we recognized is that things are more complicated now. Cities tend to be using data in a much more complicated way, much larger data sets, big data on traffic management, on building management, facilities management, and so on. And so they need a more sophisticated way of coming up with these minimal interoperability mechanisms. So what we've done is we haven't thrown out all that we've learned in the past, and we're building on it, but we're taking, we're starting in a way from first principles and trying to see how we can better describe the challenges that come around interoperability, and so that we can provide a systematic, simple way for cities to understand what they need to do in order to manage an effective data sharing ecosystem. We've got a format that we use to develop each of these MIMs. That's been standardized through the ITU as back in July last year. And it provides us with a very simple step-by-step process of identifying what challenge we're trying to address, what are all the key issues that need to be addressed within that, what requirements need to be set up to enable that to work, and then what different options cities have in order to put that into practice. So we're working on those MIMs. As I say, we've got lots of good experience already, but what we're wanting to do is to start from first principles again and make this into something that's really much more useful in the challenges that face cities and other areas today. And we do that with working groups focusing on each of these different areas that meet once every 2 or 3 weeks to take for these things further forward using use cases and so on to make it all work well. So that's the MIMs. And that's something we think is something really useful as you try to implement digital twins in your particular area. But I'd just like to fairly quickly look at how local digital twins are being supported in the EU at the moment. Now, the EU recognizes that cities are at many different stages when it comes to using this technology. You've got some that are very sophisticated. They're using it already very effectively, whereas others haven't really begun, are just beginning to think about it and don't necessarily have the things they need in place. And what the EU didn't want to do was to somehow just focus on tools that would help the advanced cities and communities and leave behind those that were at the beginning stages. And so what it did was it set up initially a couple of, or a number of projects that it funded, it commissioned. One was to look at foundational work, in other words, to scope out what was needed in Europe to help all cities and communities to move forward with this. Another one was to look at, another one was to set up the EDIC, which we're going to look at in a moment. Then it's funded lots of projects, and it's also been funding standardization processes, which all of us, of course, can take value from, because in the UK, although we're not part of Europe in some ways, but the British Standards Institution is part of the standards work that's going on in Europe. So we're all part of that. And of course, definitely in terms of international work. So I won't go into all the details just to make sure we've got time. We've got our visitors from Brussels over there. So that's a quick moment. But just to quickly talk about, the first step was to scope out the toolbox that was needed. What kind of tools are needed by cities and communities to develop local digital twins? So that was what's needed and how can we implement it? And quite a lot of work was put into developing a reference architecture to cover the key issues that, about which tools were going to be needed by cities to make that work. So that was a scoping out exercise. Then there was some work that was done about procurement guidelines and templates, which was really addressing in a way the more basic set of things that cities needed to be putting in place and procuring. And there's a lot of very good support materials that you can get online that's available. That, I don't know if you can see it, but that's got a list of some of the key issues that are covered by the procurement guidelines. And that's available now, that's finished, and that's very practical. And then another thing that's been done is to look at how the MIMS can be tested and checked to make sure that any product or services is compliant with the minimal interoperability mechanisms. The EDIC is really basically to say that in Europe, there's a number of member states have joined together to set up a proper structure to manage all of these things long term. So these things are going to be continued to be developed, the toolbox and everything else in the future. And there's continued to be projects that will help develop these things further. And then just to mention, as I've said, the European Commission is funding standards work, which we're involved in Open Agile Smart Cities. And also we're very much involved in some of the international standardization that's going on. A quick thing just to finish with. Those who are interested in positive energy districts, where we're looking at how digital twins in particular can help ensure a district can tackle net zero more effectively. We've got a couple of days of workshops, online webinars next week, and the details are there. We'd love to have you on board. Thank you very much. Thank you.